get started.
Hello.
Oh, yes, great. I can hear you. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the virtual Busan Democracy Forum 2020 under the theme Transformative Global Citizenship Education and COVID-19 Pandemic for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Society. We'll kick off the session one, Challenges of Participatory Democracy in Asia. My name is Sue. I'm the program manager at the Asia Democracy Network, and I will be moderating this session. We have three guests from Hong Kong, Thailand, and India here with us today remotely from all over the world, and also in Busan attending uh, directly to talk about the regression of democracy in Asia and kind of giving a look into what's really going on with civil society activism and democracy. Thank you for joining to all of those online, as well as being in Busan in person. Um, Before we start, we'll go ahead and start with a video to kind of give an overview of the state of civil society right now. So we'll start with the video. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm not sure if you were able to hear the sound. I couldn't. So hopefully everyone else was able to. If we could get that checked, please. The sound didn't come out on for us online. But I think everyone were able to at least read the subtitles of that video, and it really, as the video indicated, um, the pandemic has definitely highlighted and brought forth the inequalities of the world and has further oppressed and suppressed the vulnerable and minorities. And I think, and of course, as the video also pointed out, civil society has played a very key role uh, during the pandemic to fill in the gaps of what the national governments or federal governments were not able to. So, um, so we'll go ahead and go down a little bit more deeper into specific areas in Asia and kind of see what's been happening, how democracy has been impacted. So today we'll start with first with Hong Kong. We have Mr. Eric Lai. He's from the Election Observation Project. He's the vice co-convener, Civil Human Rights Front, and he's also the co-convener of the Civil Human Rights Front in Hong Kong. Unfortunately, he was not able to be with us in person. He did send his presentation as a video. But before we go into his video, uh, we thought that it would be more beneficial to give a bit of a background of what happened in Hong Kong. Hong Kong was one of the biggest setbacks in democracy starting in 2019, and which is still continuing today, which we'll go into a little bit later. But to give you a background of what's happening in Hong Kong, we'll go ahead and see a video first. It's about under 10 minutes. Bear with us, it is informational to give you more information on what has happened in Hong Kong.
The people of Hong Kong are out in the streets. Hundreds of thousands are demonstrating against a deeply unpopular bill. But this is about a whole lot more than a bill. It's about the status of Hong Kong and the power China has over it. It's a fight to preserve the freedoms people have here, and it all started with a murder. On February 8, 2018, a young couple, Chan Tong-kai and Poon Hyo-wing, went from their home in Hong Kong to Taiwan for vacation. They stayed at the Purple Garden Hotel in Taipei for 9 days. But on February 17th, only one of them returned to Hong Kong. There, 1 month later, Chan confessed to murdering his girlfriend, who was pregnant at the time. But there was a problem. Hong Kong authorities couldn't charge him for murder because he did it in Taiwan. And they couldn't send him back to Taiwan to be charged because Hong Kong and Taiwan don't have an extradition agreement. So in 2019, Hong Kong's government proposed one. It would let them transfer suspects to Taiwan so they could be tried for their crimes. But the same bill would also allow extradition to mainland China,
where there's no fair trial, there's no humane punishment, and there's completely no separation of powers.
And that's what sparked these protests. China and Hong Kong are two very different places with a very complex political relationship, and the extradition bill threatens to give China more power over Hong Kong. See, Hong Kong is technically a part of China, but it operates as a semi-autonomous region. It all began in the late 1800s, when China lost a series of wars to Britain and ended up ceding Hong Kong for a period of 99 years. Hong Kong remained a British colony until 1997, when Britain gave it back to China under a special agreement. It was called One Country, Two Systems. It made Hong Kong a part of China, but it also said that Hong Kong would retain a high degree of autonomy, as well as democratic freedoms, like the right to vote, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, of assembly. And that made Hong Kong very different from mainland China, which is authoritarian. Citizens there don't have the same freedoms. Its legal system is often used to arrest, punish, and silence people who speak out against the state. But according to the agreement, one country, two systems wouldn't last forever. In 2047, Hong Kong is expected to fully become a part of China. The problem is, China isn't waiting for the deal to expire. Under the rule of Chinese leader Xi Jinping, pro-democracy leaders have already been arrested in Hong Kong, and mysterious abductions of booksellers have created a threat to free speech. But Hong Kong has been pushing back. In 2003, 500,000 Hong Kongers successfully fought legislation that would have punished speaking out against China. And in 2014, tens of thousands of protesters occupied the city for weeks to protest China's influence over Hong Kong's elections. Now, Hong Kongers are fighting the extradition bill because the bill is widely seen as the next step in China's encroachment on Hong Kong's autonomy.
因為我哋對呢個中國嘅法律係冇信心。任何一個市民，如果係大陸政權，佢係唔中意你，佢可以用一個任何嘅理由。
如果那說難聽點，如果他們條例通過，那就代表香港淪陷。
The sheer size of these protests shows you just how much opposition there is to this bill. But if Hong Kong's legislature votes on the bill, it'll probably pass. And that's because of the unique nature of Hong Kong's democracy. For starters, Hong Kong's people don't vote for their leader. The chief executive is selected by a small committee and approved by China. And even though they're the head of the government, they don't make the laws. That happens here. Like many democracies, Hong Kong has a legislature with democratically elected representatives. It's called the Legislative Council, or LegCo, and it has 70 seats. Within this system, Hong Kong has many political parties, but they are mostly either pro-democracy or pro-China. In every election, Hong Kong's pro-democracy and anti-establishment parties have won the popular vote, but they occupy less than half of the seats in the LegCo. This is because when Hong Kongers vote, they're only voting for these 40 of the 70 seats. The other 30 are chosen by the various business communities of Hong Kong. For example, one seat belongs to the finance industry, one seat belongs to the medical industry, one belongs to the insurance industry, and so on. Many of these 30 seats are voted on by corporations, and because big business has an incentive to be friendly with China, those seats are dominated by pro-China political parties. When Hong Kong was handed over to China in 1997, Hong Kong and China made an agreement that eventually all members of the council would be elected by the people. But that never happened, and ever since the handoff, pro-China parties have controlled the LegCo, despite having never won more than 50% of the popular vote.
The way it's structured, they want to make sure that the executive branch can have easy control over it, and that would serve Beijing very well indeed.
Within this unique structure, the extradition bill has created new tensions and fueled anger among pro-democracy politicians, and it's driven hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers into the streets.
其实民主的基础本来就是建立在人民上的，所以大家都走出来，那你还能不重视这个事件吗？
While this isn't Hong Kong's first protest against China's influence, it is the biggest. And many say this time is different because of the people involved. Professionals like lawyers and politicians are participating.
Our legal sector staged the biggest ever protest parade.
But it's young people who are at the forefront, since they have the most to lose. They are the first generation born under one country, two systems, and in 28 years, when that arrangement ends, they'll be Hong Kong's professional class.
I won't be around anymore. It's their future, it's their Hong Kong. They have every right to fight it.
佢哋出嚟係唔係為咗自己，佢係為咗成個香港嘅未來。
好感動，真係好感動。
The protests have convinced Hong Kong's government to suspend the bill, but that's not enough. Many want the bill withdrawn completely.
都係從頭到尾都係撤回，冇要暫緩。
That's because these protests are also part of a larger fight to push back against China's encroachment now, not just when time's up.
其實唔使2047年啊，我話俾你聽， 其實你而家見到大陸政府其實一路已經將嗰條線推前，
所以大家只係想為自己原本擁有嘅權利去出嚟遊行咯。我哋仲有好多機會去改變。
2047 is on its way, but it's not here yet. And until then, Hong Kongers still have a voice.
History will tell whether we succeed, but even if we failed, history would say they did put up a fight and they didn't just take things lying down, and that's what we're trying to do too.
Great, thank you. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of a background of how the protest has come to the point where it is now. And to go into a little bit deeper, we'll have Eric Lai kind of give us a glimpse of how the protest has progressed and how that has taken into effect currently through the national security law. So without further ado, I will introduce Eric Lai.
Dear friends, thank you for allowing me to share with you the current challenges of the democratic development in Hong Kong. My name is Eric Lai. I am a member of the Election Observation Project in Hong Kong, and I was also the convener and vice convener of the Civil Human Rights Front in Hong Kong, which is a major social movement coalition. And last year I visited Seoul to share with many friends of civil society and to the media about the situations in Hong Kong. Things are getting worse, but we can still see seeds of hope in our city. So today I would like to share with you what are the main challenges in 2020s and what are the possible responses to this political situation. We have witnessed waves of protests in Hong Kong since June 2019, and the protests, whatever people regard as non-violent resistance or violent crashes, it did help to boost people's civic awareness, and which is expressed in the voting rate and in the voting results of the district council election last year, which was held in 24th of November. There are more than 380 pro-democracy candidates won seats, and they became the majority in 17 councils out of 18 councils in Hong Kong. Although the district council was consultative in nature, it also boosted the morale for the democratic development in Hong Kong, and also alarmed the government, whatever from Hong Kong or Beijing, the demands of democratization and the demands of political justice in Hong Kong. However, since 2020, especially after the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are several situations that we feel our civic spaces and our basic liberties and freedoms are diminished or repressed. So I will highlight mainly four challenges. The first is the prohibition of the exercise of freedom of assembly due to the excuse or the cause of public health. The government adopted several social distancing measures to criminalize any public assemblies during the COVID pandemic. Also, the government took opportunities of no mobilization. The government of Hong Kong took opportunities during the pandemic, where mobilization would not be possible, to expand the scope of arrest of political activists. And the Chinese government also took this opportunity to enact and promulgate a national security law in Hong Kong, bypassing the local consultation, bypassing the scrutiny of the local legislature, and disallowed judicial review of this new legislation. And at the end, the government of Hong Kong postponed the Legislative Council election after several events which the government felt they would lose in the elections. I will explain it further. So in April 2020, the government arrested a total of 15 former lawmakers and political activists in Hong Kong, which they were regarded as the leaders in the democratic movement for more than 2 decades, including Martin Lee and Margaret Ng. They were awarded by the International Bar Association last year in Seoul. And now they were arrested because they were attending an unauthorized peaceful assembly. So usually if these pro-democracy figures were arrested, that will have a strong backfire by the people, and then there will be protests and assemblies and processions. However, because of the pandemic, people were prudent, and the government could take this advantage to continue the arrest without physical resistance from the people. By the end of May in 2020, the Chinese government's National People's Congress decided to implement a law to so-called safeguarding national security in Hong Kong. And by the end of June, the National People's Congress released the content and the details of the national security law. The problem is, according to the basic law, which is a mini constitution in Hong Kong, the legislation for national security should be the domestic affairs of the Hong Kong government. We should be responsibilities for the local legislature and the executive governments to do the legislative processes. However, this time the Chinese government bypassed all the local branches of the government and implement the national security law with setting up national security agencies in Hong Kong, which is directly responsible to China. It means that the problems of the national security law, I will discuss it later on, have a severe infringement to the basic political freedoms and civil rights, not only to the people in Hong Kong, but also to everyone who are supporting the democratic development and the civil liberties of the people in Hong Kong around the world. And this is the first day after the implementation of national security law that the law enforcement displayed a flag, a banner, I would say a banner in purple. What is it say, may I translate, is this is a warning from the police that your banners, your slogans, or any behavior has the intention of secession or subversion of the state, and it may constitute to violating the national security law in Hong Kong, and they may be arrested or charged. So, since the national security law has been passed by the Chinese government, even speaking or chanting slogans relate to Hong Kong independence or relate to revolution, any such wordings, sensitive wordings, are discriminated as breaking the law, which is unprecedented since the handover in 1997. Between July and November 2020, there are already 36 people arrested, 33 people are on bail, and 3 are charged and denied bail. There are at least 8 Hong Kong citizens are wanted by the government, and they are all overseas, including Nathan Law, and who is now who claimed himself now in UK. And sadly, the youngest one who was arrested because of the national security law was just 15 years old. And in our common law principle, presumption of bail is of paramount importance for a fair trial. However, in the national security law, it says in Article 42, no bail shall be granted to a criminal suspect or defendant unless the judge has sufficient grounds of believing that the criminal suspect or defendant will not continue to commit acts endangering national security. And in the case that we have, the free charged persons which are remanded now, their age, the youngest one was 19 years old, and the oldest one was 32 years old. So people doubt why they could constitute to a danger of national security if they were not given bail. And worse still, the national security law infringes our conventional belief of separation of powers, because the chief executive can designate a number of judges from the magistrate to take the cases of national security. The designations of judges in trials, in court cases, should belong to the jurisdiction of the judiciary, but now the chief executive, which is unelected in Hong Kong, which is appointed by Beijing, has lots of power to do so. So these are the three defendants. They were denied the bail, and the reason of their remanding them was merely because someone demonstrated a slogan which was sensitive to Beijing, and the youngest one, with the age of 19, was managing social media that promote Hong Kong independence. So all of these three cases are denied bail, and which caused many controversies in the among the legal field. And hopefully, we will know the result, because among the arrestees, Joshua Wong and Annis Chow were also they were not charged by the national security so far, but hopefully, unfortunately, perhaps. Yesterday, they were sentenced on the 2nd of December, and we all know the result. And there's also an intimidation and a chilling effect to the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. And according to the national security also enabled law enforcement to arrest Jimmy Lai, media tycoon in Hong Kong, and more than 100 of police officers searched and blocked the Apple Daily, the tower, as well as the Asian Nikkei magazine. There are many recent charges related to the national security law, including a charge on a DJ in an online video platform, online internet radio channel, alleged of money laundering in funding drive for protesters to study in Taiwan. So these many cases help us to understand that the national security law is a kind of a weapon for the state, on one hand, to arrest leading figures in the democratic movement, in the anti-extradition movement last year, as well as to cut the connections, to cut the financial connections between protesters and the people in Hong Kong and the world outside. And there are many impacts on the political society. If you don't mind, I will just go as quick as possible. These 5 political parties were suspended, and their political activists fled the city, like Levin Law, and 12 election candidates were disqualified last year for the Legislative Council election last year, which did not happen at the end. As I said, the police raid on Apple Daily and Nikkei, and also there are many international news agencies removed their headquarters from Hong Kong to Seoul. And there are scrutinizations of books written by pro-democracy figures in the public libraries, and those books were removed. And because of this intimidation environment, Outstanding Academic Association decided to change the venue of holding a workshop from Hong Kong to Seoul. And university professors were accused by pro-Beijing media of promoting Hong Kong independence, which was not true. And a primary school teacher's license was revoked by the Education Bureau because he was alleged of spreading pro-independence messages, despite the lesson in question being heard in March 2019, and the national security law has no retrospective power. So, for the cases happened before the national security law, the government was weaponizing every laws inherited from the British colonial regime to arrest or to revoke license to disqualify people related to political beliefs that the government disallows. And 2 weeks ago, the Chinese University of Hong Kong took initiative to report to the police about students rallying inside campus with slogans and banners that may violate national security law, which was very alarming because even protesting inside university campuses could be reported by the university management bodies to the government. And the university management did not protect the students, but rather sending the students to the hands of the law enforcement or the national security department. And self-censorship also happened in many domains, including religions. The Catholic diocese, which was opposing the national security law in 2003, now become more welcoming to the national security law because the leader of the church, the cardinal, told the media that he understands why China decided to enact the national security law and believed the national security law would not infringe religious freedom. But just 2 months after his speech, the education department of the Catholic diocese told all the schools to encourage patriotic values to students in order to foster the correct values of national identity and respect national symbols, including national flags or national anthem, to facilitate the education of national security law. So what made worse is the government also set up a reporting hotline for everyone to report information or materials related to people who may violate national security law, which has caused a chilling effect to people, to families, to workplace, and to every domains of civil society. And last but not the least, the national security law poses impacts on the international community because the law has unusual extraterritoriality. According to national security law, the law should apply to offenses under this law committed against a Hong Kong SAR from outside the region by the person who is not a permanent resident of the region. Usually, extraterritoriality is applicable to the residents of the country outside who live outside. Who lives outside the country, but now it applies to everyone who support Hong Kong's civil liberties or who support the people who were seen as breaking the national security law in Hong Kong. The government weaponized other legal instruments, as I said, and I will end in 2 minutes. After the implementation of national security law, the pro-democracy camp heard so-called civil voting across the city, which was performed as a primaries for pro-democracy candidates in order to maximize the utility of strategic voting in the coming elections. The government at the end disqualified or technically speaking to invalidate the nomination of 12 pro-democracy candidates which won in the primaries, and just a day after the disqualification, the National People's Congress of China announced a decision to extend the length of term of the 6th Legislative Council to no less than 1 year. Impending elections may not happen again in the future. This decision supported the Hong Kong government's decisions a few days ago that they will postpone the election because of the pandemic. And the Chinese government and Chinese National People's Congress Standing Committee also released a decision 3 months after, which just happened 2 weeks ago. They released a decision to list the condition of lawmakers being disqualified and gave a justification for the chief executive to disqualify 4 pro-democracy lawmakers without legislative or judicial procedure, which is an excessive expansion of power for the executive branch in Hong Kong. And I would say it's not only breaks the principle of separation of powers, but it also breaks the democratic fundamentals in Hong Kong, since even as an elected member in the legislature, it can be disqualified by the unelected chief executive government. So to conclude, I have some more slides, but I guess it's better to have time for you for your discussion on the situation in Hong Kong. I will skip this. And what are the top issues or concerns in Hong Kong today that I think our friends around the world can pay attention to? The first is the securitization of Hong Kong society in all aspects under the national security law, which is much severe than any local laws, then which has the prevailing position to any laws in Hong Kong. Even the Hong Kong Bill of Rights Ordinance, which is a human rights act in Hong Kong, is subordinate to the national security law. And we also concern the fair trial of Hong Kong and China when there are 12 young people were sent for trial to China because of their attempt to flee the city to Taiwan, because of their charges of rioting and national security, of the breach of national security. We also concern the fair trial for the pro-democracy activists and the protesters in Hong Kong, including Joshua Wong, including Agnes Chow, who has reported to the police because of her charge of breaking national security law. Maybe she will be sent to court tomorrow. Maybe she will be further finally charged of breaking the national security law, and it may cause years of sentence or life imprisonment, or they will be sent back to China for trial. And we have no idea whether the government will continue holding the Legislative Council election next year, and we are not sure whether the election can be free and fair if disqualifications of candidates continues, or if the government extend the voting, if the government extend the votings to mainland Hong Kong residents only. And all these situations make global citizenship education very, very difficult in Hong Kong now, and the government is attempting to replace the liberal studies in high schools with patriotic education. So all these concerns, I hope, I'm sure that there are many similarities to other jurisdictions in Asia, but I hope you can help. You can also pay attention to what's going on in Hong Kong, and although they are really much more difficult for people in Hong Kong to build more substantive solidarity because of the national security law that forbids so-called colluding with foreign forces. I hope the facts, the evidence that I share in this presentation can help you to have a clear picture of what's going on and what will happen in Hong Kong in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I actually recorded this with Eric before the sentencing. of Joshua Wong, Agnes, and Ivan. And just to give everybody an update, as the sentencing was yesterday, Joshua Wong was sentenced to 13 and a half months in prison. Agnes Chow received 10 months. Ivan received 7 months. All three, their sentencing could get extended while they're in prison. And as Eric mentioned, there are risks that their trial could be held back in Beijing. And they are also eligible to face up to life. So I think that's why, we could see the vagueness and broadness of this national security law that really puts these type of sentences and suppresses activists on the ground. And of course, the pandemic has exacerbated the situation, as Eric mentioned, threatening their electoral democracy as they have postponed their elections, and it's very possible that it could be indefinitely postponed. I think those are very key points that we Asia civil society members have to keep in mind. And as I've said this many times in other meetings also, and I really think there are more more things that democratic countries in Asia could do for situations like this. We rarely see democracy champion countries in Asia standing up for Hong Kong, and that really is unfortunate. And it makes solidarity, and I think there's more impact if Asian democracies really stand up and stand with what's happening inside Hong Kong. And lastly, the Asia Democracy Network did we will be releasing a statement in response to the sentencing. And we really hope that you could join us in endorsing it so that we could get more international solidarity. And as Eric mentioned, with the national security law, it has tied the hands of Hong Kong activists. They can't do as much inside. It ties our hands on the outside. But what we could do while we enjoy our freedoms on the outside is really to voice strongly for Hong Kong and show our support and our solidarity. And I think that will empower the activists inside. So thank you for that. And we'll move on to, we'll hear about what's also been, we've been hearing very exciting, movements happening in Thailand this year. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard the people's movement that has brought out people in the hundreds and thousands, and which is still happening today. And we will hear from Chanakunan Ramsap. She's a Thai refugee currently based in South Korea. She was working for human rights, democracy, and women's rights when she was in Thailand since 2013. And in 2014, when there was a coup d'etat, she was fighting against the military dictatorship in Thailand. In 2018, she was charged with the Le Majesté law, which would have put her in prison to 5 to 15 years in prison. We will hear her perspective as she is an activist on the ground of what's happening in Thailand. I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Sue. Hi, everyone. First of all, I want to thank to the organizer of Busan Democracy Forum to give me this opportunity to speak here and to share with you guys about what's happening in Thailand right now. So my name is Chinoknan Romsap. I'm a Thai refugee. Actually, I'm the first Thai refugee in Korea, and hopefully I will be the last one. Yeah. So before I start my presentation, I also have a video clip, a short clip to show you guys about this is the summary about what's happening right now. So yeah.
Thailand has been grappling with anti-government protests that started in early 2020. Defying a government ban on gatherings, tens of thousands of young Thais have been taking to the streets of the capital Bangkok and more recently holding demonstrations in other cities around the kingdom. Police have responded by firing water cannons and arresting dozens of protesters. The political standoff surfaced after Thailand's March 2019 elections, which brought 5 years of military rule to an end. Since the 2014 coup that toppled the elected government of Yingluck Shinawatra, Thailand had been ruled by a military junta that installed General Prayut Chan-o-cha as Prime Minister. But before the long-awaited 2019 elections, Prayut left the army so he could run for office as a civilian. After campaigning with the support of military-backed parties, election results disputed by opposition figures returned Prayut to office. His continued role as Prime Minister ensured that Thailand's military remained at the heart of Thai politics, even after civilian rule was restored. In the 2019 elections, most young Thais supported the Future Forward Party, which came in third after the polls closed. But in February 2020, a court ordered the party to disband. Judges ruled against its leader, Thanatorn Junggrungrungkit, over charges he had issued an illegal loan to the party. Young Thais who were angry about the ruling were soon protesting on the streets. The demonstrations were interrupted by measures to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, but protesters returned in June after the disappearance of a pro-democracy activist who was living in exile in Cambodia. Protesters accused Thai authorities of arranging for the activist to be kidnapped, a charge denied by the police and government officials. The demonstrators have 3 key demands. They want Prayut to resign as Prime Minister and a new, more democratic constitution. They also want reform of Thailand's powerful monarchy. Thailand has the world's strictest lèse-majesté laws which prohibit insults to the royal family. The monarchy has for decades been the most influential force in Thai society, culture and politics. However, the monarchy entered a period of transition after the death of King Bhumibol Adulyadej in 2016. The end of his 70-year reign allowed his son, King Maha Vajiralongkorn, to succeed him. His father had been a largely unifying force in a country that has endured years of political infighting and several coups. So the latest challenges to the monarchy's power and legitimacy are unprecedented, creating a potentially explosive backdrop to the grievances against Prayut's military-linked government. On October 14th, protesters heckled a royal motorcade carrying Queen Suthida and the king's youngest son, Prince Dipankorn. 2 activists were arrested on charges of attempting violence against the Queen. They could face life in prison if convicted. Demonstrators also object to the king's decision to declare crown wealth and holdings as his personal assets, making him the richest person in Thailand. And the king faces criticism for claiming military power should be in royal hands. He has transferred 2 key army units from the military chain of command and into the direct control of the palace. Prime Minister Prayut has meanwhile rejected the protesters' demands for him to step down. He cited the incident involving the Queen's motorcade to justify an emergency decree banning gatherings of more than 5 people in Bangkok. The order also enforces a nationwide ban on broadcasting or publishing news and information that incites public fear.
The objective behind this order is because we receive information from intelligence units concerned that parts of the content and distorted information have been used and disseminated to cause confusion and instigation, causing an unrest in society.
Thai authorities have also reportedly banned Telegram, an encrypted messaging app used by protesters.
มาแสดงจุดยืนเฉยๆว่าเราจะไม่ยอมจำนนต่อเผด็จการอีกต่อไปคืออยากแสดงให้เขาเห็นว่าถึงเขาจะทำอะไรมีวิธีการอะไรที่แบบสกปรกขนาดไหนก็ตามหนูก็แบบว่าอยากออกมาให้เขารู้ว่าแบบมันไม่มีผลอะไรกับคนตอนนี้แล้วอะไรเงี้ย
Despite the emergency decree, protesters remain defiant and refuse to back down, further stoking the flames of the latest chapter of Thailand's long history of political turmoil.
So yeah, that's like the summary of what's happening in Thailand and how it happened. Actually, it's like a summary of my presentation too. Next, I wanna show you my PowerPoint slide, so I can explain it more deeply. Okay. So what's really happening in Thailand? It start when if I can like uh tell about the starting point, I think it should be in 2014 coup d'etat. So in May 2014, there was a coup d'etat, the latest one, and it causes many political problem that has happening right now. And then last year in 2019 there was an election, but apparently the election was rigged. That's why we got the same government, and the problem still unsolved. Yeah, and it leads to 2020 protests. So yeah, what happened after the coup in 2014? So like after the coup, the military dictatorship has announced the martial law and also emergency decree. So it banned people from gathering for more than 5 people, and if you gather for more than 5 people, you cannot talk about politics or cannot criticize the military coup. That was illegal right then after the coup. And then the military dictatorship started to summon many people to like show up, and many people that has showed up, they got charged after that with less majesty and maybe sometimes sedition law at that time. Next thing that had happened was after the coup d'etat, they started to use military court. So normally, if you are a citizen, then when you do something wrong, you will be sent to civilian court, right? But then after the coup, the military started to send all the political cases to military court. And what about the special thing about military court? So for the military court, the judges are soldiers, and they don't have to graduate from law school, so they are just soldiers. Yeah, and yeah, that's like the failure of the justice system in Thailand too after the coup d'etat. And the last thing was that less majestic law has been used as a political tool widely. And as you can see, like this is the charge of cases charged with less majestic law after the coup d'etat. You can see like the number is increasing every year, 2014, 15, and 16. Like, yeah. And even though like they try to not using less majesty in the past 2 years, but there are many they're trying to use similar law like less majesty. For example, Computer Crime Act that they had been used against the activists or netizens online. And another law is called sedition law. So sedition law has been used instead of less majesty in the past 2 years too. And the sentence is almost the same. So you can be jailed for 5 to 15 years. When we talk about Thai politics, we cannot talk we cannot talk about only the coup and the military. We need to focus on the monarchy too, because why? Because Thailand have had about 18 attempts, coup d'etat attempts, and it's since 84 years ago, we have had 13 coup d'etats. And almost every time that the coup d'etat happened, the king signed to approve almost every time. And by doing that, it means that the king also support the coup, the military dictatorship. Yeah, so the problem is that in Thailand, we couldn't criticize about the king or the royal family at all. It's against the law and is very risky that you will get less you get charged with less majesty. Yep. So what is happening this year in Thailand? It started when COVID-19 has happened. So I would say that normally after the coup d'etat in 2014, there has been only few people protesting against the coup d'etat and come out on the street. Because I thought Thai people were living in fear after the coup. They were afraid of being charged. They were afraid of coming out. Yeah, because it costs a lot to there are many consequences that you might face if you speak out after the coup d'etat. But then earlier this year, it was the new phenomenon that I have never seen before in my life, when a lot of people, mostly young generation, they are coming out on the street and protest, and they speak out about their rights. They are calling for democracy. It started around March, April. That time, the COVID-19 started to happen a little bit in Thailand, and the government were trying to, they launched this emergency decree. So it's banning people from gathering outside of in the public space. So even though Thai Thai healthcare system is good, that we don't find a lot of the infector inside of Thailand, but still the government still use this emergency decree to be like the tools to ban people from gathering. And then the protest started to happen in the university at the first time, and then it spread outside of the capital city, Bangkok, and many universities outside of Bangkok started to have protests almost every week. Yeah, but right now still is not like a big protest, and not like people didn't gather together a lot until there was a trigger point. The trigger point was one Thai refugee. He was living in Cambodia. He was abducted and forced to disappear in June. And there was a video clip from the CCTV seeing that some guys took him into a black van, and yeah, he was disappeared until now. Like no one know where he is. And this is not the first time that this happened to Thai refugee outside of Thailand. Since 2016, it had happened before. Since 2016, there were about nine Thai refugee got abducted or murdered or killed. So especially Thai refugees who were living in Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and also Thai refugee in Malaysia also got sent back to Thailand too. Yeah, so after this incident that this guy in Cambodia got abducted, a lot more people came out on the street and protesting for his right and calling for the government. If you see the picture, like the right one, they are showing the banner finding lost people. Yeah, there are about 9 Thai refugees who got abducted or murdered. These are the demands of the protests: resign, rewrite, and reform. So the protesters right now, they want the Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha to be resigned, and they want to rewrite the constitution, since this one is this one was from the military coup d'etat, and it benefit only the group of people. And the last one is to reform the monarchy. Since right now, Thai people, they can speak out in the public. They can criticize the monarchy now, and they learn that the monarchy was the one institute that support the coup d'etat. And the king and the royal family is not under the law. So they're trying to call for that. For international support, after the protest, the big protest in August in Thailand, we can see there are a lot of Thai people outside of the country who live in many countries abroad. They gather together too, and they're trying to speak out about what is happening in Thailand. They had their own protests in many countries. Also, when they protest in other countries, then local people have support them. They got the support from local NGOs, local activists, and also I'm trying to mention about the Milk Tea Alliance. So this Milk Tea Alliance was happened around earlier this year. It started on Twitter. So Thai netizens and Hong Kong netizens, they were supporting Taiwanese. Yeah, and this group has formed, and we have the common issues to become the alliance to support each other against the Chinese influence in those countries. And at that time, no one thought that this would become a real thing. But after August, September, when in Thailand there are many protests, we speak for each other in the protests in Thailand. We also speak about what is happening in Hong Kong and in Taiwan right now. So like last month, Hong Kong protesters also support Thailand, the Thai democracy in Hong Kong, in the protests in Hong Kong too. So I think this is the benefit of this kind of inter-alliance is that it attract the media a lot. In the protests in Thailand, it's very, very diverse. So we do not talk about what we want for us, but we talk about what should it be in your country, in Hong Kong and in Taiwan too. So I think that's a beautiful thing. And this is like the protest in Seoul happened last month in August 25th, and I was a part of it too. It happened in Seoul, and there are a lot of people joining. And this is another example of the protest in Boston, Massachusetts. Thai people in the U.S. in Boston, they were gathered together at this square. The square name is Pumipon Square. It's the birthplace of the past king. So that's why they protest there. Okay, lastly, I wanna conclude with yeah, it's a good sign for me. It's a good sign that right now we see a lot of Thai people coming out on the street, and there are many people who are interested in fighting for their rights and and the democracy in their country. But of course, it was better than before, than 3 years ago, 5 years ago. But right now, we don't know how it will end, because we know that the military dictatorship and the king, that will not be compromised with the Thai people. So right now, all we can do is like keep protesting every month, every day, and yeah, still like there's still in Thailand right now, I think there's no end game for, like, they don't know how to end it. And another like institution, like the government and the royal family, also will not be compromised. So what I'm worried right now is that if they do not compromise and they do not talk, and if they do not listen to the protester, then there will be and they will use violence too, because right now, starting from in October, the government started to use violence against the protester, using the water cannon and also tear gas, and they're trying to use rubber bullet too. So it's, as you can see, like, it's getting more violent. And yeah, that's what I'm worried right now. So I'm gonna end it for the first part from now, and maybe we can discuss again at the Q&A session. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your presentation. I think that's the beauty of international solidarity, highlighting each other's movements and really bringing that into the international community. I wish we could start like a noodle alliance so that we could expand outside, of those three countries, and have it all across Asia. I think we have. I was told by the organizers that we have someone on the floor. We have Don also from Thailand, who will be able to add a little bit. Don, I'll give you the floor to add on to the Thai experience.
Thank you, because I want to add something more, because I think Shinoknan now, she's living in Korea, and then I'm the one in Thailand. So first of all, I want to to emphasize what Shinoknan says, that what is happening now is like we never expect this one before. We never expect people will go on the street and talk about the monarchy like directly. I never expect that, and then I really appreciate with the youth. Now it's like the demonstrations now led by youth. I have to be like say it clearly, the youth is the leader of the demonstration. But the good thing, the one thing is like the youth always say, all people of the demonstrations, we are leaders. So it means all people is leader. It's really the good definition of our movement. And if you have chance, you go to the mob, to the protest, you can see like we have like the festival. It's not just we are talking about politics all the time, but we have like many creative ways to talk about that. Like you could see on the video, right? We have some like drawing. They use drawing to show the political expressions, painting, and singing sometimes, and then also the art installations. Also, it's really popular. The one is like dancing. There's always use the K-pop dancing in the mob also, and you have some activity like fashion shows. We have like some showing symbolic something. We don't talk directly, but showing symbolic, and the music. So what the youth calling or the is clearly they want the free democracies, not what we really have now. Under the Constitution 2017 is not the democracy. I have to say that clearly. It's drafted by military, and then it's not. We don't have our representative in the government, in the parliament all the time, and the demonstration is not talk about. The demonstrations also including many social issues like student problem, the gender issue, labor, social welfare, democracy. Now I could say that Thai people really progress now, what I expect. So what is our obstacle? Our problem is the government. If the government understand people listening, so I think Thailand can go beyond what I'm thinking, and I'm sure that Thailand will be better than what really are now. So, and lastly, I want to thank you for international support. Even ADN and then many organizations from many countries. I could not mention the name. I'm sure it takes more than 1 hour. I really thank you. And then what I want to do next, I want to make like what you say. So I want to have the network, not the big network among democracies, based on the basic principle of global citizenship. And then, thank you. ขอบคุณครับ
Thank you, Don. I think that's a very good perspective from on the ground. And all of us outside, are so empowered by seeing the young people out there. Like you said, we were all amazed too that we saw this openly criticizing the monarchy, and which we have not seen for many years. So thank you for that perspective. And we stand with you, and we hope the movement still continues. So and then so the organizers tell me we have 30 more minutes, and we have our last presentation. We have Dr. Kaustav Kanti Banyapadahe. He's the director of participatory research in Asia, India. For more than 25 years, he's been working on citizen participation in urban and rural context. He's an acclaimed researcher, trainer, facilitator of organizations, development and participatory planning, monitoring, evaluation, and impact assessment. He's the co-coordinator of the Asia Democracy Research Network, and he's also serves on the governing council of my organization, Asia Democracy Network. And he'll give us, India has been, we've been seeing a lot of information and news coming out of India, a lot of civic space drastically, taken out, and we will hear from Kaustav on the specifics. Kaustav, I'll give the mic to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Sue. This is a great opportunity for me to participate in the Busan Democracy Forum. I'm delighted to be here. And I was really enthused by two presentations from Hong Kong and Thailand. They are depressing in some sense, but they are aspirational as well. So unfortunately, I have to bring another gloomy story of democracy from India. But as my Thai colleagues and Hong Kong colleagues expressed, that our aspiration goes high and the struggle continues, and using whatever means we can get, of course, in a non-violent manner. So what I will do, of course, the pandemic has affected globally, and India is one of the worst affected countries. But how political governance and the democracy is shaping in the country, that's the story I'm going to tell you. So what I'll do, I will tell you the political context in which the pandemic occurred in India. Then I will come back to the current scenario and perhaps a few thoughts on the future of democracy in India. So just to give you the political context, um, during the last quarter of 2019 and the first quarter of 2020. In fact, many of you who have been following Indian politics must have noticed that for past few years, India has been witnessing a tumultuous and somewhat pervasive celebration of majoritarianism, bigotry, and divisiveness across the length and breadth of the country. And that is the time when the global pandemic surfaced in India. Now, it's too unfortunate that almost every act of the current government is challenging the very foundation of our democracy, which was based on the principles of equity, justice, freedom, and secularism. So in December 2019, the Indian Parliament passed a very controversial act, which talks about Citizenship Amendment Act or CAA. And this act was replaced by a Citizenship Act of 1955. And what it did, like it provided the path for citizenship for particular countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan. And what was disturbing in this act, the civil society and the political opposition was quite okay with the fact that some of the people who have been wanting to acquire Indian citizenship, that was welcome. But for the first time in Indian constitutional history, religion was used overtly to provide citizenship to the Indian. Now, these caused widespread fear among the Muslims, and a lot of protests, covered the country. As soon as the Citizenship Amendment Act was passed, the government also moved to implement National Register of Citizens. Just to clarify a little bit about the National Register of Citizens, this is a register where all the Indian citizens will be enlisted. And this was enacted and implemented in the northeastern state of Assam. And as a result of this exercise, almost like 19 million people were detained, and they were declared as illegal citizens to India. And they were put in the detention center. And the experience of Assam was known to every minority people in India, and that caused a widespread fear. And as a result, all the secular forces, the democratic forces, they joined a countrywide protest. And when these protests were taking place in different parts of the country, I would say that most of the protests were nonviolent and peaceful. But in February 2020, Delhi witnessed one of the worst communal riots in which 53 people died, and almost like 2/3 of them were Muslims. What was very disturbing was the brazen biasness from the police in investigating the riot, and unprecedented impunity of the rioters, who particularly those who belong to the ruling party. So the entire investigation was criticized because of these biases. And immediately before the Citizenship Amendment Act was enacted in the parliament in August 2019, the Indian government also revoked Article 370. This has a great political significance as far as the state of Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. And because this article provided a special status to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and it was part of an agreement at the time of the independence of India. And anticipating a huge protest, the government arrested almost like the entire opposition. They were put in house arrest. There was complete shutdown of internet, mobile, and all educational institutions. Now, obviously, in the public discourse was around whether Article 370 should be there or not. And there is a kind of divided opinion about that. And government has the perfect legitimacy to revoke or introduce any article. But the manner in which the Article 370 was revoked, that was questionable, because it was not consulted with the opposition parties in the parliament. It was a completely confidential and done with all secrecy. So as a result, even the governor of Jammu and Kashmir was not fully aware about the state. So that gave a feeling to most of the opposition parties, civil society groups, that this is a hush-hush politics and a governance by secrecy. Now, as India was protesting against the CAA and also the Article 370 and many other controversial steps that the government had taken, then the pandemic occurred. And what was very disturbing, that of course it is understandable that along with the global practices, many countries have imposed lockdown. Many countries have sort of suggested physical distancing, and we are still part of that pandemic regime, and we are strictly following some of the decorums in public life. But what was disturbing was the way lockdown was announced throughout the country. On 24th of March, the Prime Minister of India came to the television, national television, at 8 p.m. and he declared that the country will go under lockdown from the 12 midnight on the same day. So essentially, it gave 4 hours of time for preparation to anyone. And this lockdown was one of the, if you cite the Oxford Research Group, they have come up with an index of the degree of lockdown, and it was Indian lockdown scored 100 out of 100. So it was one of the most stringent lockdown in the world. So what has happened that because Indian economy is 90% of Indian economy is dependent on the informality, both in the rural and urban areas, and there are about 400 million intra and intrastate migrants who got worst hit by the lockdown. And because of this unpreparedness, for the first week, they could manage, because most of the urban migrant workers, they work in the informal settings, and they are daily wage earner or weekly wage earner. So they could manage the first day, second day, or at the most the first 7 days. But after that, they didn't have any cash in hand to pay for their rent, pay for their food, or pay for their medicine or any other health requirement. And since the entire economy was under lockdown, the factories were closed, the industries were closed, so they didn't even get their wages. So as a result, um, it was a horrendous situation for all these migrants. And then when they were starving, um, the government failed to provide any kind of promise that they will be looked after, um, they will be supported. The local governance, the state government, or the national government, none of them could provide any kind of support to them. And then they decided to uh, you know walk back to their respective native villages. And some of the migrant groups, they have even walked for 1,000 miles. Can you imagine uh, that in order to reach home they needed to walk for 1,000 miles? So that was one of the fallouts. And the informal sector is still reeling under that stress, because although the lockdown has been lifted, except in certain locations, but the industries and the factories are yet to be open in full swing. So what has happened that India has been experiencing both the worst outcomes. One, uh, that as a result of this abrupt and hasty, unthoughtful lockdown, the we are experiencing a tremendous economic slowdown. And although government has not declared it as an economic recession, but this is an undeclared recession. Um, the second quarter of economy saw like 23% contraction of the economy. The third quarter has slightly sort of recovered, but it's still almost 7 to 8% contraction is there. And the second sort of fallout is that despite the fact that we had an unplanned and most stringent lockdown, because of the poor health infrastructure, um, the government has failed to control the disease. And if you see the number of cases and the number of deaths as a result of the pandemic, India is the third most affected country after the US and Brazil. So so now we are questioning that what was the purpose of this unplanned lockdown, which was imposed with like a curfew, imposed like a curfew. Um, Along with this mismanagement of the pandemic, we also experienced a breakdown of parliamentary traditions. Despite the fact that there are many deficiencies in Indian democracy, but Indian Parliament was seen to be an epitome of democratic practices and democratic traditions for many decades. Now, taking the excuse of the pandemic, when the monsoon session was to be started in India, in the Indian Parliament, um, the the government announced the suspension of question hour and private members bill during that particular session. And many called it this is a murder of democracy. And literally it's a murder of democracy because the question hour is the only time when the ministers and all other executives are questioned. That is one of the most significant checks and balance um, within the parliamentary system. Um, and uh, it is the time when most significant and far-reaching, impacting some of the laws and bills were introduced in the parliament. The opposition boycotted the houses, both the houses, the upper house and the lower house, and two houses of the parliament within 10 days passed almost like 25 bills. So 25 new acts were introduced during the time without any discussion, without any significant debate, without any significant discussion. So in a sense, also, some of the opposition members suggested that some of these controversial bills and debatable bills should be referred to the parliamentary committee system, but it was completely ignored. So one of the quotes from Mr. Vivek Agnihotri, who was the former Secretary General of Upper House, when sort of he mentioned about that 25 bills were passed in 10 days. It was a record of some sort, but not a great tribute to the Indian legislature, because the legislation has to be done in a consultative manner by taking into confidence the opposition, which were completely ignored during that. So one can infer that even the parliamentary processes were short-circuited. Now you must be watching some protest, all over the country, but especially in Punjab, Haryana, and in Delhi. And this was as a result of the New Farms Act 2020. I'm sort of citing it as an example that how the democracy or democratic practices and the democratic governance has been affected by the way the government is functioning at this moment. So the Indian Parliament, last month passed 3 acts. One, the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act 2020, which permits the sale of agricultural produce outside the mandis, what we call the agricultural market, which have been regulated by the Agricultural Produce Market Committee, APMC, constituted by various state governments. The second act was the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act 2020, which provided legal support for contract farming, where the farmers can negotiate with the private investors, and the private investors can practice contract farming. And the Essential Commodities Amendment Act 2020, which deregulates the production. Some of the agricultural produces, particularly rice, cereal, oilseed, pulses, and the storage of certain of these food items. This act was enacted at the time when India is under tremendous food shortage, but after the Green Revolution, India has sort of surmounted that problem. Now we have surplus grains. Now, apparently, if you look at the title and the object of these 3 acts, nobody would, provide any critique about that. Yes, of course, the agriculture needs to be deregulated to some extent, but the role of the government has to be there. So that's the bone of the contention, that whether you privatize the agriculture sector totally or have some control from the state. So as a result of the enactment of these 3 acts, the farmers are now furious, and they are agitating for last 1 month, and particularly in the last 3 days, for last almost like 4-5 days, the farmers from Punjab and Haryana, from some parts of Uttar Pradesh, they have been marching towards Delhi. And why are they protesting? And why are they demanding the repeal of this act? First of all, this is a justified fear that the entry of private players into the agricultural sector will diminish the bargaining power of marginal farmers. And when this is particularly true when the farmers get into an illegal battle with the big corporate agencies. Who is going to provide that support to the farmers to battle with the big corporate agencies? The second is the farmers suspect that as the farm producers would be allowed to sold outside the agricultural produce market, which is controlled, and the price is also controlled. That the government has an obligation to provide minimum support price. So as the APMCs will be dismantled, the current sort of minimum practice of providing minimum support price will also disappear. So that's one of the fears of the farmers. And the third is pulling out cereals, pulses, potatoes, and edible oil seed, etc., from the list of essential commodities will allow hoarding of such food items by the corporates and eventually creating an artificial storage and rising price. So these are fears from the farmers. Now, what is important here is not the perception of the farmers, but the government's ability to talk to the farmers and appreciate their perception and clarify their doubts. What we have been observing is the unwillingness on part of the government, and this is a clear example of majoritarian politics, where since the government has come up with these acts, it has to be there. There is absolutely no willingness on part of the government to have an authentic dialogue with the farmers. And as a result, almost like 35 farmers organizations are now protesting all over the country. Now, the other fallout is in this pandemic time is the changing federalism during the pandemic. And what we have been observing an unprecedented infringement of power and authority by the union or central government over the state government. But what is also disturbing is that the state governments, which are now being ruled by the same party which is ruling the central government, they are not even looking at the interest of the state government. It's only in a few states where the opposition parties are in power, they are trying to raise their voices. So some of the examples of infringement of this power and authority by the union government is that during the lockdown, we didn't have an appropriate law to tackle the pandemic-like situation. So the central government has imposed National Disaster Management Act 2005 and the Epidemic Disease Act, which was enacted at the time of the British regime, 1897. And both these acts have a tendency to centralize power, and it empowers the union government to commandeer the state and the local authorities. So the very fabric of our federalism, although we are a unitary country, we have a unitary governance, but there has been a long understanding between the central government and the state government and the local government that who does what is their respective responsibilities. But through this enactment of or imposition of these two acts, the central government totally centralized the control and how pandemic will be mitigated. So recently, the union government has, as I mentioned, that this 3 Agricultural Act. And agriculture was supposed to be, there's a bit of confusion in the constitution itself. But traditionally, agriculture was considered to be a state government subject. And by enacting these 3 significant acts, it is an example of infringement of power and authority over the state government. Lastly, the union government, it's about 6-7 years that we have introduced a new tax regime under goods and service tax, and there is an agreement between the national government and the state government that what percentage of taxes will be kept by the central government and the state government, while the tax will be collected by the central government. So that's an agreement which has been laid out by the GST Council as well as by the Central Finance Commission. But what has happened that by citing the incident of pandemic as an act of God, which is sort of often written in all kinds of insurance policies, that which is sort of beyond control of the government or beyond control of an entity. The union government has refused to pay the tax, a share of tax to the state government. And as a result, the state governments, most of the state governments are running deficit in fiscal terms. So what I'm trying to sort of explain here is that taking pandemic as an excuse, the central government has further centralized its control over the governance processes in the country, which is a dangerous sign, which is a dangerous tendency in a big country which is founded on the principle of federalism. And then, there is a kind of...
Kostov, we need to wrap it up a little bit.
2 minutes?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Then there is a kind of frontal attack on civil society through what we call Foreign Contribution Regulation Act amendments. And Government of India enacted this Foreign Contribution Regulatory Amendment Act to amend this act. And the stated object reads to strengthen the compliance mechanisms, enhance transparency and accountability in the receipt and utilization of foreign contribution, and facilitating genuine NGOs or associations who are working for the welfare of the society. If you read this objective of this amendment, I don't think you would be disagreeing, but the way and the subsequent clauses that were introduced, first of all, it now prohibits transfer of foreign contribution. Suppose we are registered under FCRA and we have a license to receive foreign grant, but once we receive the fund, we will not be able to transfer that grant money or any kind of foreign resources to any other smaller NGOs. And this is going to affect thousands of smaller NGOs who are working on the grassroots and supporting people. Then the second provision is the lowering of the administrative expense, which was earlier 50%. Now it has come down to 20%. So imagine that the organizations which are research oriented, those who are working on democracy and human rights issues, it's not the field expenses, it's the salary expenses or the admin expenses which should be higher. But with a single stroke, this has been sort of brought down to 20%. And then power to prohibit a foreign contribution receipt from utilizing or receiving. Even if I receive a foreign grant, but the government, if they suspect anything, they can impose a ban on utilizing these resources. And then the fourth provision was a mandatory opening of the FCRA bank account in State Bank. It's a centralized bank where one has to open the bank account, and then you can transfer that money to other accounts. So it's a kind of total control over how much money is being sort of received by NGOs through foreign sources. So where is India's democracy heading towards? So first of all, as I said, that the tendency to govern India by all forms of majoritarianism continue. The culture of discussion, culture of debate, public consultation, those things are gradually diminishing. The bigotry and the divisiveness continue to be the main sources of political support, which is very concerning. And meanwhile, the formal opposition parties continue to suffer from inertia and irrelevance. So many political opposition parties have given up that nothing can be done. That kind of attitude. As far as the civil society is concerned, a section of the civil society is floundering in the aftermath of these FCRA changes. But as my other colleagues were saying, that hope continues. And many civil society organizations are continuing their struggle and engagement, constructive engagement with the government at the central, state, and the local level. So let me stop here, and perhaps some of the questions can be answered. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kostov. I think through that we could see, I mean, especially with all the presentations, we're seeing how law is being used to really restrict civic space, and infringe on our fundamental rights. So unfortunately, my hope was to have some time to have some questions and have a discussion, but the session has to end at 11, or sorry, my time 11, at what is it, 4:50 over there in Korea. So unfortunately, we cannot take any questions. I apologize for that. We hope you enjoyed all the presentations and the opportunities to learn a little bit more. I think if you have questions, I highly encourage you to contact the organizers, and they could route your questions to the presenters directly. And hopefully we could continue the conversation offline or through email. Thank you everyone for being here with us and sharing your stories. Thank you to the team in Busan for coordinating all of this. And we hope to see you all soon in person when this is all over. Thank you. Have a good evening. Have a good day. Have a good morning.
Thank you.
See you all soon.